I was trying to think last night, where do I begin in discussing this? I'll get into this in another video, but we're talking about Kentucky here, and there is something known as the Kentucky Triangle. Okay, it is a place of heightened supernormal, paranormal activity. And I theorize this has to do with the geological formation of the area. It has to do with maybe the huge amount of limestone. It might have to do with the caves, with Mammoth Cave being the longest cave system in the world that they know about yet. There's just something to do with the geological formation of Kentucky, I think, that lends to its very bizarre supernatural elements. And I've been other places in the world that are kind of like that. They're like portals, basically, where the veil is very thin between worlds. This property consisted of the original building, and then later in like 1910, there was another building built. The new building was built on the property. That new building was like this square, like 3 stories high or something like that, and it had a flat roof, which flat roofs are a terrible thing. Do not ever purchase a property that has a flat roof. I didn't live there, but at the age of 2 we moved into this apartment between the 2 buildings. The things that happened there were exceedingly powerful, and it needs to be known that this shit exists. Some people's childhood homes might have been haunted. You might be able to relate to me on that. And you know what it's like when you live somewhere like that. It trips you out, dude. It's wild, man. It's wild, okay? So this was my childhood home. This was the building that I grew up in from the age of probably 4 or 5 to 18. Okay, so that was the original building, as we call it, but was it really the original building? Okay, because the story of this place is that in the 1800s, it was a house. It was just a home, and then they built this building onto it. All I can tell you is this right here was a church, and when they were tearing this church down, the bell fell on a man and killed him. So. And I do just want to say, no shade, this building did look creepier than hell. It did look creepy as hell. It did, okay? I'm not trying to say my childhood home didn't look creepier than hell from, the jump day fucking 1, okay? I am not saying it didn't. This is a Google Maps satellite photo of the property. So this is the big building I never lived in. This is the building connecting those. Right here was the apartments. Now this first 2-story part right here, because there's one back here and one right here. This first one was kind of a crossroads of all these different doors that led in different directions. There was a door that led into this building. There was a door that led into my home, and then just various stuff that I will get to. What we're going to be talking about right now is this middle section of these buildings. We moved into the apartment when I was 2, and I was still in a crib. My dad had built a staircase in this hall room. He had built a staircase and then cut out the wall at the top of this staircase, and that led into the rectangular building, right? 1 floor of the rectangular building that he then made into a kitchen. So technically I did a little bit live in that, rectangular building, but I just don't consider myself to have ever lived there, straight up. I just lived in maybe a freaking room of it that my dad had cut the wall out and made a staircase and made it, even connect to that room. That was the hallway room to all the different doors and stuff. And so it's just listen, some of my earliest memories are of paranormal things that I would see and experience in that part of the building. And that part of the building was not a happy haunted type haunted. It probably wasn't the worst shit ever, but it was not a happy collection of spirits. One of my earliest memories is laying in my crib, and they had me sleeping in the hallway of this apartment. So my crib was here, my parents' bedroom was like over here, the rest of the hallway went down into the living room. And then, so here's my crib, right? In the hallway, well, there was a door that led to another hallway that led to the room, the crossroads room with all the doors in the different directions you could go in. And beyond that was like that two-story part of the middle part was where my brothers lived. I'm laying in my crib, okay, and I'm looking out through like the wooden, like the bars on my crib, okay, and I'm staring at this little red rocking chair, which by the grace of God, I have a photo of it. This is the rocking chair. And as you can see, it's got some white paint detailing on the head, right? It's a little kid's rocking chair. I'm laying in my crib, staring at this rocking chair, staring at the white paint detailing. And the chair is just rocking. It's rocking by itself. It's just rocking. And I fell asleep watching that. I don't know how many times, but I can only tell you that for decades after, sometimes when I would be falling asleep, I would see it in my head. It would come up and I would get this rocking feeling, and I would see it rocking back and forth as I fell asleep. Even when you're a little baby like that, like when you see some shit like that, I feel like you know something's strange. You know, you don't know what it is maybe, but you know it's odd. And so I just remember watching that rocking chair rocking back and forth, and that was probably the most neutral ghost thing that ever like happened in that middle part, because the rest of it really was just creepier than shit. Okay, I mean, the door that led into like the hall room where you could go through a bunch of different doors, right? That door, it was such a common occurrence for it just to open and close by itself that eventually we were just like we would stop and be like, whoa, like, you know, what's up with that? But we wouldn't even investigate because it just was so common for this door to just open and close. There were many experiences of quite a frightening nature that did take place when I was laying in my crib. You know, I would see all kind of crazy shit. I mean, it was like potent, dude. Like, we had a neighbor, a guy who lived in the house across the way, and he was a carpenter. You know, my dad was a carpenter, he was a carpenter, they were friends, you know, and my dad got him over there to do a little bit of work, you know, and so he was building shelves in their bedroom, and he was there alone one day, and I'm pretty sure he was up on a ladder or something, and he was building these shelves. He was there alone, right? He said that his tool belt lifted up off of him and then slammed back down on his ass. And he said that he turned around and got the fuck out of there, and that man never stepped foot back in that building. He wouldn't even like come close to it after that. And he told us that the following Sunday he went to church, right? He said the pastor looked at him, said something like, hey, are you okay? You know, and he said, you look like you've seen a ghost. There were a lot of instances of physical movements that were unexplainable. Objects would move and be found somewhere else that nobody put them there, and it didn't make no kind of sense. They would be found in strange positions, in strange formations, in very strange, out of reach areas. Just a lot of, I don't want to say some poltergeist shit, but if there was any part of that building that could have had some poltergeist shit going on, dude, it would be that middle section. And I don't know anything about the big rectangular building. Like, I don't know what went on there. one of the things that a lot of people would say that they saw was these huge surgical lights that were left behind in the building and just abandoned and stuff. They would like wake up in the middle of the night and these lights would be on. And there was not like electricity in that building. Like there wasn't, you know, like none of that going on. It was abandoned and, you know, totally like dilapidated to a dangerous degree. You know, to go in there was like, you know, you're definitely risking your life because of the flat roof and all the flooding and all of the water damage, all of the just damage to it. You know, it's like it was not a safe place to just traipse around in. That red rocking chair is emblazoned in my memory forever. One of my earliest memories, just seeing it rocking back and forth by itself. Like I said, my dad built a stairway, and he cut out a wall and made it that room that it opened up into. He made it our kitchen when we lived in this middle part, and I saw a lot of things. So out the windows of the kitchen, you could see onto the roof of that middle part area that we lived in. It was just, you could see the roof. I remember sitting in my high chair and I looked out the window and this man walked by the window and he was wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt. And he went over to an area of the roof and kind of stooped down, and he was like digging through something, like a box or something on the roof. He was fiddling with it, but there was nothing there, right? And I remember watching him do that and then standing back up like he found what he was looking for and walking back off, basically. And I was not the only person who saw this man. My grandpa actually saw him on that part of the roof there at a very different time in the history of this. Like, I don't think that we even lived in that middle part anymore when my grandpa saw him up there on the roof. One day I was sitting at the top of the stairs that led to the kitchen. I was sitting at the top of the stairs and I was staring down into the hallway room, the crossroads room. Just a small, you know, square room, okay? And there was an elderly man dressed in this blue suit. It was like a bright blue suit. He was bald, you know. He was an elderly man, and he had his hands clasped behind his back, and he was pacing back and forth in this room, just staring at the floor, pacing back and forth. And I was staring at him, and then I remember I went to my mom and I was like, you know, I thought maybe it was a friend of my dad's. I was like, you know, what's that man doing down there? You know, is it Daddy's friend or whatever? And she was like, what? You know, and I don't know if she came with me or I went back to look by myself or what the deal was, but when I went and looked again, you know, he was gone. So those are some of the earliest like ghost sightings that I had. And in both of these places, a lot of activity went on that wasn't, you know, actually seeing a ghost. You know, there was a lot of hearing things, there was a lot of objects moving, and there were a fair bit of ghost sightings by myself and others. It was just a mix of phenomena. When I was about 4, we were moved into the original building, the old part that I would then spend the rest of my childhood years in. I'm so friggin' grateful that I didn't live in the middle part, you know, forever, and that wasn't like the whole thing, you know. Like, that would have been really, really bad, because that place fucking sucked. Like, no shade, and it's whatever, but it was not, like, fun. It really wasn't. I, throughout the years, lived in various rooms in this building, several of them, some way longer than others that I lived in them, and you know, most of them had their own different things going on. And my dad altered the building a lot. Like, he would close off hallways, and he would make new doorways into places that they didn't exist before, and like put certain rooms together, and he was altering it to fit his vision, how he thought it would be better. He made our main stairway in the old part of the building, like, that we used all the time, out of this freaking tiny ass room that was just a tiny ass room previously, and then he just cut a hole in the wall where the main staircase was on the other side of that wall, and built a little staircase going up to it, and that was what we used for forever, you know, as the main stair, like, access. And it was really interesting, because before he came along and was doing all those alterations to the place, it had already been altered massively. So I'll show you a little bit of that right now. So this whole front part of the building, from the inside, it got walled off, dude, to where there were like entire like rooms, small parts of bigger rooms that were behind this wall that we never saw or knew about when I lived there. And, you know, if we had put two and two together on the shape of the building and stuff, we probably would have known that they were back there, but we didn't, you know what I'm saying? We only knew and saw them for the first time after the fire. So here's a photo, probably from like 2006 or 7. So they walled it off, ruined the front of the building, basically. You know, covered up the lawn with those buildings, and just destroyed the look of it. So yeah, you know, over the course of more than 100 years, this building, it did start to look a little bit rough. And like I said, it always looked creepier than hell. I mean, this looks creepier than hell, in my opinion. Like, I love it, and I think it's great, but it do be looking creepy as hell. So now I've caught us up to the point in time where I moved into the original building, and from there, let's just say there are a lot of characters to introduce you to. But there's one in particular that all of this hinges on. And this was a ghost among many. However, this was more than just a ghost. This is where we're going to get into the supernatural. I'd be lying if I told you that I know what to classify this entity as. I actually don't know. I simplify it by calling it a ghost, because it certainly fit the criteria of one. Calling it a ghost is not sufficient. I just want to do a good job sharing this history, information, these experiences. And I hope that as we go along here, I will be able to do it justice, and I will be able to convey it and explain. And maybe even along the way during this process, I will come to conclusions that I had never reached before, you know, simply because I will be talking about it, some of these things, for the first time ever. And it's not that I haven't thought about it a lot over the years, you know, certain aspects of it I definitely have, but I never let myself dive into it that much, just because of how crazy it all sounds. A lot of the stuff that happened and that I know about and all of this, like, were things that I didn't let myself think about that much, just because I didn't want to lose my shit, you know. But I'm not afraid to dive into it now. And even if I was a little bit afraid, it wouldn't matter, because this is something I have to do, you know. So I just hope that I can do a good job at this.